He built a $12 billion empire from nothing. Every single dollar, designed for one purpose: revenge. The man who destroyed his father, who broke his family, who made his mother die of a broken heart. Richard Marlowe. And Dominic Hale had finally found the perfect weapon. She was innocent, naive, painfully trusting. Everything he needed her to be. He orchestrated every single moment. 6 months of carefully planned coincidences. 6 months of lies so perfect she never saw them coming. She fell in love with a man who didn't exist. And in 72 hours, she would marry him. The plan was flawless. The execution was perfect. And then, she walked into his penthouse wearing snowflakes in her hair. And something inside him broke. For the first time in 17 years, Dominic Hale felt something he couldn't afford to feel. Something dangerous. Something called love. But before he could stop it, the truth came out. And everything fell apart. What happened next changed everything. Hey, beautiful souls. Thank you so much for being here with me. I'm absolutely thrilled you clicked on this story, because what's about to unfold is going to shake you to your core. I have to ask though, where are you watching from right now? Comment down below. I love knowing where my global family is tuning in from. Are you cozy at home? On your lunch break? Let me know. And real talk, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, please hit that subscribe button right now. You're not going to want to miss what happens next in Dominic and Elena's story. Trust me, there are twists coming that will absolutely blow your mind. So buckle up, grab your favorite drink, and get ready to feel everything in this one. Elena had spent her whole life learning how to disappear. In a room full of her father's ruthless associates, she'd perfected the art of becoming invisible. Standing in corners, nursing champagne she didn't want, wearing expressions neutral enough to avoid drawing attention. Her father had taught her this, though not intentionally. He taught her by example. Power came from domination, and domination required stepping on anyone in your way. Elena had decided early on that she wanted no part of it. That's why she'd moved into a small apartment in Brooklyn instead of the Marlowe family penthouse on Fifth Avenue. Why she pursued art curation instead of business. Why she spent her days surrounded by paintings and sculptures instead of spreadsheets and hostile takeovers. Art didn't lie. Art didn't manipulate. Art simply existed, beautiful and honest, asking nothing of you except to feel it. Her studio apartment was her sanctuary. The walls were covered in photographs of paintings she loved. Impressionist masters, contemporary installations, abstract pieces that most people would dismiss as just paint thrown at a canvas. But Elena understood them. She understood the vulnerability required to create something that naked, that exposed to judgment. She was sitting on her worn velvet couch now, the morning after she'd first met Dominic Hale at a gallery opening, staring at her phone. There was a text from him. Can't stop thinking about you. Want to grab coffee? Her heart did that stupid flutter thing it had been doing ever since she'd looked up and saw him standing across the gallery, studying the same Rothko painting she'd been lost in. He'd approached her with genuine curiosity, asked her what the painting meant to her, actually listened to her answer without looking at his phone or checking the time. No one ever did that. It had been 6 months of carefully orchestrated coincidences, though Elena didn't know they were orchestrated. 6 months of believing in fate, in destiny, in the romantic notion that sometimes you just met your person. And when you did, you recognized them immediately. Bone-deep recognition, soul-level knowing. She'd felt at the moment Dominic had smiled at her across that gallery opening. But there was a part of Elena, the quiet, observant part that worked in art curation, that had been taught to notice details. And there were details about Dominic Hale that didn't quite add up. The way his smile didn't always reach his eyes. The way he seemed to be constantly calculating something when he thought she wasn't looking. The way he'd suddenly turned the conversation to her father's business empire. His questions framed so subtly that she almost didn't notice he was asking at all. And the prenup. Oh God, the prenup. Her father had shown it to her, trying to frame it as protective of the family assets. But Elena had read it carefully, every single clause. The document had been written by Dominic's lawyers, and it was less a protection than a trap. If she ever left Dominic, she'd walk away with nothing. If she ever spoke publicly about his business dealings, she'd be liable for substantial damages. If she ever betrayed his confidence, there were clauses that made her head spin. It was the prenup of a man preparing for war. Elena had asked her father about it directly. "Is he marrying me for money?" she'd said, trying to keep her voice light, as if the answer didn't matter when it absolutely did. Her father had given her that look, the one that had made men in boardrooms tremble. "He's marrying you to merge our companies, darling. Love is irrelevant. This is business." She'd felt something crack inside her chest then. Something fundamental about the way she'd been viewing this entire situation had fractured. Across the city, in his penthouse office, Dominic Hale stood at floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. He owned 47 floors. Everything below was his to acquire, manipulate, or discard. At 34, he'd built Hale Technologies from nothing into a $12 billion empire. Self-made, ruthless, empty. He'd never felt more alone. His phone buzzed. A single text from his lawyer. "It's done. Marlowe signed the prenup. The wedding is in 3 days." 3 days. Dominic's jaw clenched as he stared at his reflection in the glass. Behind him, Manhattan sparkled with the lights of people living lives he could buy and discard before breakfast. But there was only one life that mattered now. One name that had haunted him since he was 17 years old. Richard Marlowe. That name was carved into Dominic's chest like a scar that would never fade. Marlowe had orchestrated it all. The hostile takeover, the leaked intellectual property, the smear campaign that painted Dominic's father as incompetent. A calculated destruction of a man simply because he'd refused to sell his company at a fraction of its worth. Dominic's father hadn't survived the shame. A heart attack, the doctor said, but Dominic knew better. Marlowe had killed him just as surely as if he'd pulled the trigger. And now Dominic was going to do the same to Marlowe. Except this time, it would be slower, more deliberate, more complete. The marriage to Elena Marlowe was the final chess move in a game that had taken Dominic 8 years to orchestrate. He'd spent those years positioning himself, building his empire into something so powerful that Marlowe couldn't ignore him. Then he'd made his move, buying up Marlowe's debt, infiltrating his inner circle, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment had come when Marlowe needed him. Marlowe's empire was crumbling. Bad investments, failed ventures, the market turning against him. He was desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. So when Dominic had casually mentioned that a merger between their companies could save Marlowe from financial ruin, Marlowe had listened. And when Dominic had suggested that sealing the deal with a marriage alliance would make the venture capital community confident enough to invest, Marlowe had jumped at it. A marriage to his daughter, Elena. Dominic had researched her meticulously. She was 29 years old, quiet, worked as a freelance art curator, had minimal social media presence. She'd been engaged once, but called it off 3 years ago. According to the reports, she'd spent most of her life trying to distance herself from her father's ruthless business practices. Perfect. She was unsuspecting and innocent. Exactly what Dominic needed. A pawn who had no idea she was being used to destroy her own father. He'd spent the last 3 months engineering their chance meetings. At a charity gala, at an art exhibition, at a private club where Marlowe's associates gathered. Each time, Dominic had positioned himself perfectly, letting Elena believe that their connection was serendipitous. And each time, he'd watched her walls come down a little more. She was starved for genuine human connection. That much was obvious. She smiled at his jokes, real smiles, not the practiced ones her father's world demanded. She listened when he talked about his childhood, his dreams, the loneliness of building an empire. And when he'd kissed her for the first time in a moonlit garden at their final chance meeting, she'd melted against him like she was drowning and he was air. It had made his stomach turn slightly, but he'd pushed through it. Love was a weapon he'd never expected to wield. But it worked. It always worked. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days until Elena became Mrs. Dominic Hale. 3 days until the final piece of his revenge fell into place. Once they were married, it would take less than 6 months to complete the destruction. Dominic would merge their companies, consolidate Marlowe's weakened assets, and then systematically dismantle everything Marlowe had built. He'd ensure Marlowe watched it happen in real time, forced to witness his own ruin. The elevator chimed. Dominic turned, expecting his assistant, but instead found himself face to face with the one person he hadn't planned for. Elena stood in his penthouse doorway, wearing a cream-colored coat and an expression caught between hope and hesitation. Her auburn hair was down, falling past her shoulders, and there were snowflakes melting in it. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly, stepping inside. "My father doesn't know I came. I needed to see you." Before the wedding, Dominic felt something shift in his chest, something he recognized as dangerous and quickly buried it. "Elena." "Hi." His voice came out smooth, practiced. "I wasn't expecting you." She smiled that smile again, the real one, the one that made her entire face light up from the inside. "I know. I'm sorry. It's just, I'm nervous, I guess. Cold feet, or whatever they call it." She laughed nervously. "Is that crazy? I barely know you, and yet I've never been more certain of anything in my life." She's falling for the illusion, Dominic reminded himself. She's falling for the man you pretended to be, not the real you. But as he stood there, watching her take off her coat to reveal a simple burgundy sweater underneath, watching her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear in that unconscious gesture she made when she was vulnerable, Dominic felt the familiar numbness in his chest crack slightly. It was just a crack, barely noticeable, but it was there. "You're not crazy," he heard himself say, moving toward her. "I was nervous too." She looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face as if trying to memorize it. "Were you?" "Really terrified," he lied, reaching for her hand. Her skin was cold from the outside, and when she squeezed his fingers, the crack in his chest widened just a fraction more. "But that's not a bad thing. It means you matter." She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest, and Dominic wrapped his arms around her. From this angle, he could see the city lights twinkling behind her through the windows, and for a moment, just a moment, he let himself pretend that this was real, that she was here because she actually loved him, not because her father was desperate and she was naive, that he wasn't planning to destroy her entire family. 3 days, she whispered against his chest. "And then we're going to be happy." Dominic closed his eyes and held her tighter, even as something inside him screamed that he was making a mistake, that he was playing with fire, that this woman was going to become his only weakness. His best friend and business partner, Zach, was the first to notice something was off. "You're distracted," Zach said, lounging in Dominic's office chair like he owned it. They'd known each other since Yale, had built Hale Technologies together before Dominic had pushed him out of the spotlight. "And distracted Dominic Hale is not a thing I thought existed." "I'm not distracted," Dominic said, but he'd been staring at the same line of code for 5 minutes without registering it. "You're marrying her in 3 days, and you haven't even told me what she's like." "That's not like you. That's very much not like you." Zach sat up, his expression turning serious. "Tell me you're not actually developing feelings for this woman. Tell me this is still just about destroying her father." Dominic's hands clenched into fists. "It is." "Then why do you sound like you're trying to convince yourself?" "I'm not." Dominic turned away from the window, away from the view of the city where Elena lived in her little Brooklyn apartment. "Elena is exactly what I need her to be. Trustworthy, naive, emotionally available. She's a perfect pawn." "Right." Zach stood, walking toward him. "Except pawns don't walk into billionaires' penthouses unannounced. Pawns don't look at you like you hung the moon and stars. And pawns definitely don't make you hesitate, which is what you're doing." "I'm not hesitating." "You haven't talked to your therapist in 3 weeks. You're not sleeping. You're reviewing files on Marlowe constantly, looking for a way that doesn't destroy his daughter." Zach's voice was softer now, less accusatory and more concerned. "When was the last time you thought about the fact that Elena is going to be devastated when she finds out the truth?" Dominic didn't answer, because he knew exactly when the last time was. It was approximately 4 seconds ago, and it made him feel something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Regret. "I'm doing what needs to be done," Dominic said finally. "Marlowe destroyed my family. He destroyed everything we built. And if that means collateral damage in the form of his naive daughter, then that's a price I'm willing to pay." Zach studied him for a long moment. "Is it though? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying very hard to convince yourself of that." After Zach left, Dominic remained in his office, staring at the files he'd been reviewing. Marlowe's face stared back at him from a dozen different photographs. A man in his 60s, graying at the temples, with the kind of smile that had convinced people to sign away their livelihoods. This was the man who'd destroyed Dominic's father. This was the man who'd caused his mother to die of a broken heart. This was the man who'd spent decades crushing people beneath his heel, never once looking back to see the damage he'd caused. Dominic was simply returning the favor. And if Elena was hurt in the process, well, that was unfortunate. But it was also inevitable. Except it didn't feel inevitable. It felt like a choice. And for the first time in 8 years, Dominic wasn't certain he wanted to make that choice. The night before the wedding, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in her small Brooklyn apartment, in the twin bed she'd had since college. She'd never bothered to upgrade because it felt indulgent, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she'd wake up as Elena Hale. Tomorrow, her entire life would change. Tomorrow, she'd step into a future she'd never quite dared to imagine. And she was terrified. Not because she didn't love Dominic. She did. She'd fallen hard and fast, the way she did with everything. Art, music, life. She felt things deeply, acutely, without the filters most people developed over the years. Her therapist said it was a vulnerability that could work for her or against her, depending on how she used it. But what if she was wrong about him? What if there was something she was missing? Elena got out of bed and walked to the small bookshelf in her apartment, running her fingers along the spines of her favorite art books. She'd kept them since high school, books about the lives of artists, the struggles and triumphs, the way they poured their souls into their work. One book fell open to a passage she'd highlighted years ago. To create art is to be vulnerable. It is to expose the parts of yourself that are most fragile, most honest, most true. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. That's what she wanted from her marriage. That kind of mutual vulnerability. That kind of honesty. That kind of love. She pulled out her phone and texted Dominic, "I'm scared. Not of you. Just of everything changing." His response came almost immediately. "Change is terrifying. But we'll face it together. I promise." Elena read the message over and over, trying to extract all the layers of meaning, trying to determine if there was anything hidden beneath the words. But there was nothing. Just a promise. Just a man telling his bride-to-be that he'd be there for her. She wanted so badly to believe it. The wedding was held at the Plaza Hotel because Richard Marlowe insisted on displays of wealth and power even at his daughter's wedding. Elena had wanted something smaller, more intimate, a garden ceremony, maybe just close friends and family. But her father had overruled her, as he always did, and transformed the plaza's grand ballroom into a winter wonderland that cost more than most people's houses. Dominic stood at the altar in a custom Armani tuxedo, watching Elena walk down the aisle. And for a moment, just a moment, he forgot that this was all a calculated move. She looked ethereal. That was the only word for it. Her dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, and it seemed to glow as she moved. But it was her face that caught his breath. She was glowing from the inside out, genuine joy radiating from every pore. She was looking at him like he was the answer to every prayer she'd ever made, and he was lying to her on the biggest day of her life. When she reached him, she took his hands, and he felt her trembling slightly. "Hi," she whispered, so only he could hear. "Hi," he whispered back, and he meant it. In that moment, that one impossible moment, he was just a man standing at an altar with a woman who made him feel less alone. The ceremony passed in a blur. Elena's voice was steady as she took her vows, her eyes never leaving his face. And when Dominic spoke his vows, words that had been written by a team of lawyers and his publicist, he found himself pouring genuine emotion into the rehearsed lines. He promised to stand by her side, to protect her, to never let anything hurt her. All of it a lie. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Elena threw her arms around him and kissed him in front of 300 guests, and Dominic held her close, wondering when exactly he'd become the villain in this story. The reception was a glittering affair. Dominic danced with Elena, and she felt light in his arms, like she might float away if he didn't hold her anchored to earth. He danced with her mother, a delicate woman who had the same quiet grace as her daughter and none of the ruthlessness of her husband. He shook hands with business associates and smiled at photographs, playing the role of besotted groom perfectly. And all the while, he was acutely aware that Richard Marlowe was watching him. There was something calculating in Marlowe's gaze, something that made Dominic's instincts fire. A predator recognizing another predator. It was around midnight when everything changed. Dominic had stepped away from the reception to take a call, his lawyer, with an update on the merger, when a familiar figure appeared in the hallway outside the ballroom. Dominic Hale. Richard Marlowe's voice was smooth, dangerous, like honey laced with poison. "My son-in-law. How does it feel?" Dominic ended the call without a word. He'd been trained in the art of warfare since he was 17 years old, and he recognized an opening gambit when he saw one. "Feels like I'm exactly where I need to be," Dominic said carefully. Marlowe smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I wonder if you'd still feel that way if I told you the truth." "What truth?" Marlowe pulled out his phone and showed Dominic a photograph. It was Dominic, at 17, standing outside a restaurant with his father who was supposed to be dead, who had supposedly killed himself after his business failed. Except in the photograph, he was very much alive, and it was dated to 3 weeks ago. Dominic's world tilted. "Your father," Marlowe said softly, "is alive. Alive and well, and living in Buenos Aires under an assumed name. Has been for the last 17 years. Did he never tell you that? Did he never explain why he abandoned his family and let you believe he was dead?" "You're lying," Dominic said, but his voice had gone flat. Already, his mind was reorganizing the past 17 years, looking for evidence, for signs he'd missed. "I have documentation, bank records, photographs, video interviews." Marlowe stepped closer. "Your father didn't die of shame, Dominic. He faked his death because he was afraid. Afraid of me. Yes, he did steal technology that belonged to me, and he did breach our contract. But more than that, he was afraid of you. Afraid of what you'd become if you knew the truth." "Why would you tell me this?" Dominic's hands were shaking. He curled them into fists. "Because I want you to understand something," Marlowe said, his smile widening. "I've known exactly who you were since the day you met my daughter. I've known about your plan to destroy me. I've known about every move you've made, and I've let it happen because I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you this." He leaned in closer, and his voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Your father asked me to protect you, Dominic. When he faked his death, when he left, he begged me to look after his brilliant, angry son. And I have. I've guided your business moves, ensured your success, protected you from people who would have exploited you. I've been the father figure you needed, whether you knew it or not." Dominic stumbled backward. The hallway seemed to spin around him. "You're insane." "Am I?" Then ask yourself this. How did you know to make the business moves you made? Who ensured that your competitors conveniently went bankrupt right before you could crush them yourself? Who arranged for your funding when the market turned against you in 2018? Marlowe gestured expansively. "I did, Dominic. I've been your patron all along." "Why?" The word came out like a weapon. "Why would you help the son of a man you destroyed?" "Because your father asked me to. And because—" Marlowe paused, and for a moment, something almost like genuine emotion flickered across his face. "Because I realized over the years that destroying him was the biggest mistake of my life. And I wanted to ensure his son didn't make the same kind of mistakes I did." The ballroom doors opened, and Elena appeared in her wedding dress, her face flushed from dancing. "Dominic, are you okay? You've been gone for 20 minutes, and people are asking for..." She stopped. She was looking between Dominic and her father, and Dominic could see her starting to put pieces together. "What's going on?" Elena asked softly. "Nothing, sweetheart," her father said smoothly, the predator's smile returning. "Just having a chat with my new son-in-law, welcoming him to the family properly." But Elena was looking at Dominic, and her eyes were starting to change, starting to see something she hadn't before. "Dominic," she said again, and there was a question in his name this time. A question that made his stomach drop. "We should get back to the reception," Dominic said, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "In a moment," Marlowe said. He turned to Elena. "Sweetheart, did your new husband ever tell you about our first meeting? When he approached me about the merger?" "Dad," Elena's voice was a warning. "He came to me and said he wanted to consolidate our companies. He mentioned, very casually, that he'd been reviewing my financial records and had some concerns about my portfolio management. Wasn't that odd, Elena? That he'd done such a detailed investigation of my finances before even asking you out." Elena's face had gone white. She looked at Dominic, and he saw her trying to construct an alternate narrative, trying to find some explanation that didn't involve betrayal. Dominic couldn't speak, couldn't move. His mind was still processing the fact that his father was alive. That Richard Marlowe, the man he'd spent 8 years planning to destroy, had actually been protecting him. "Did you marry me to destroy my father?" Elena's voice was barely audible. And in that moment, with his bride standing in front of him in her white dress, with her father watching him like a chess master observing his opponent's final move, Dominic Hale made a decision that would change everything. He told her the truth. "Yes," he said. He looked directly at Elena, and he saw her face crumple. "I married you because I believed your father had destroyed my family. I believed that destroying him was the only way to find peace. I orchestrated our meeting. I played you. I lied to you. And I'm sorry." Elena's hands fell to her sides. You orchestrated our meeting? The gallery? All of it." "All of it," Dominic confirmed. He wanted to say more, wanted to explain about the prenup and the careful positioning and the 8 years of planning. But the words wouldn't come. Elena turned and walked back into the ballroom without another word. Marlowe watched her go, then looked at Dominic. "Well, that's not how I thought this would play out. But perhaps it's better this way. Perhaps now you'll finally listen to what I've been trying to tell you. Revenge is a cancer, Dominic. It eats you from the inside out, and it destroys everyone around you in the process. My father," Dominic started, "is alive and he's waiting for you. I have an address in Argentina, a phone number. He's been waiting 17 years for you to find him. The question is, are you going to spend the next 17 years destroying everything in pursuit of revenge? Or are you going to do something radical and actually try to fix the damage you've caused?" Marlowe handed him a business card. On the back, in precise handwriting, was an address in Buenos Aires and a 10-digit number. "Go find your father, Dominic. Go find your truth, and then come back and fix what you've broken. Because despite what you think, I don't want your destruction. I want your redemption." With that, Richard Marlowe walked back into the reception, leaving Dominic standing alone in the hallway. His entire world reconstructed and shattered in the span of 5 minutes. Inside the grand ballroom, Elena sat at a table and tried very hard not to cry in front of 300 strangers. The penthouse felt like a prison. Elena sat in the master bedroom of the Hale penthouse, the bed they were supposed to share as a married couple, still wearing her wedding dress, and watched Dominic pack a suitcase with methodical precision. He'd been there for exactly 40 minutes, hadn't looked at her once, and moved through the room like a ghost of himself. "Where are you going?" Elena asked. Her voice sounded strange, hollow, like it was coming from someone else. "Argentina," Dominic said. He didn't pause in his packing. "Buenos Aires. I need to understand what my life actually is before I can figure out how to unfuck what I've done to yours." Elena flinched at the language, then felt angry at flinching. He'd lied to her. He'd orchestrated her entire life for the past 6 months. He'd married her under false pretenses. What did it matter if he cursed? "How long will you be gone?" she asked. "I don't know." Now he did look at her, and his eyes were haunted, devastated, like a man who'd been hit by a truck and was still registering the impact. Days. Weeks. I honestly don't know. Are you coming back? The question came out smaller than she intended. Dominic sat down on the edge of the bed, several feet away from her, maintaining a careful distance, like he was afraid of contaminating her with his presence. I don't know that either. I wouldn't blame you if you filed for divorce while I'm gone. I wouldn't fight it. You'd have grounds for annulment based on fraud, misrepresentation, any number of things my lawyers would advise you to cite. Elena wanted to hit him. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to ask him how he could possibly think that after spending 6 months constructing an elaborate lie, after marrying her on that lie, after letting her fall in love with a person who didn't actually exist, he could just walk away without explanation. But she didn't do any of those things. Instead, she felt something inside her shift and settle into a kind of numbness. What was real? She asked quietly. Out of everything that happened between us, what was actually real? Dominic looked away. I don't know. That's not an acceptable answer. It's the only answer I have. He stood, returned to his packing. When I met you, everything was real from the perspective that I felt it. When I kissed you, I was genuinely attracted to you. When I held you, I wanted to protect you. But it was all built on a foundation of lies. So I suppose the question of what's real becomes philosophical rather than practical. Elena wanted to ask him more. She wanted to demand explanations for every moment, every word, every touch. But instead, she found herself standing up, finding her purse, and pulling out her phone. My father said something to me while you were having your heart-to-heart with him, Elena said quietly. He said that you looked at me the same way he looks at complex business problems, like you were trying to solve something instead of connect with something. Elena. And I defended you. I told him he was being cynical, that not everyone was motivated by business, that some people actually just wanted connection. She laughed, and it sounded broken. I was so desperate to believe in something good, in someone good, that I ignored every instinct I had. I ignored the questions I asked myself. I ignored the prenup that was designed to trap me. I ignored the way you'd periodically ask about my father's business empire. I ignored everything because I wanted so badly to believe in love. You still can, Dominic said. You can believe in love. You can have a real relationship. You deserve that. You deserve someone who wants you for you, not as a means to an end. I deserve a lot of things, Elena said coldly. Honesty being first on the list. And you couldn't even give me that. You lied every single day about who you were and what you wanted. That's not love, Dominic. That's cruelty disguised as romance. She watched him absorb that, watched it land like a physical blow. You're right, he said finally. You're absolutely right. He finished packing in silence, zipped up the suitcase, and moved toward the door. Elena sat back on the edge of the bed and watched him go. At the threshold, he paused. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. And that's exactly why I have to leave. After he was gone, Elena sat in silence for a very long time. In Buenos Aires, Dominic stood outside a small house in San Isidro, a neighborhood known for its tree-lined streets and quiet charm. The address Marlowe had given him was for a colonial-style home with white walls and a red-tiled roof. There was a garden in front, flowers blooming despite it being winter in the southern hemisphere. He'd bought a plane ticket immediately after leaving Elena. He'd texted his team to tell them he was taking emergency leave. He'd let his life implode in a matter of hours. And now he was about to confront the ghost of his past. His hand shook as he raised it to knock. Before his knuckles could connect with the wood, the door opened. The man standing in the doorway was older than Dominic remembered, 62 now, with gray threading through hair that had once been as dark as Dominic's own. He was thinner, worn at the edges, but unmistakably alive. Unmistakably the man who had raised him. The man who had taught him to code at age 8. The man who had supposedly died when Dominic was 17. Dominic, his father said, and his voice cracked on the name. Dominic couldn't move, couldn't speak. His entire body had gone rigid, caught between the impulse to embrace this man and the impulse to destroy him. "I know you have questions," his father continued. He stepped back, gesturing into the house. "Come in, please." The interior was modest. Nothing like the mansion they'd lived in before everything fell apart. There was a small living room with mismatched furniture, photographs on the walls, none of them recent, all of them from before the business collapsed, before the supposed death, before Dominic had spent 17 years building an empire on the foundation of grief and rage. Why? The word came out strangled. Dominic stood in the middle of the living room, his hands clenched into fists. "Why would you let me believe you were dead?" His father, James Hale, though he'd been living under the name Carlos Martinez, moved to pour 2 glasses of whiskey with shaking hands. "Because I was ashamed. Because I was a coward. Because I thought you'd be better off without me. Better off." Dominic's voice rose. "I spent 17 years thinking you killed yourself because of shame. I spent 17 years blaming Richard Marlowe for your death. I built an entire empire for the sole purpose of destroying him. And you were here, living in Argentina, starting over." "I know." James set down the glasses, neither of them touched. "I know what I did to you, and I've lived with it every single day." "You don't get to claim pain here," Dominic said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You don't get to say you've suffered when you're the one who made the choice. You're the one who walked away." "You're right." James sat down heavily on the worn couch. "You're absolutely right. But let me tell you what actually happened. Let me tell you the truth I should have told you 17 years ago." Dominic remained standing, his body coiled tight, but he didn't leave. "I did steal technology from Marlowe," James began. "That part of the story you know is true. But it wasn't corporate espionage the way the media portrayed it. Marlowe and I were partners once. Did you know that? Before Marlowe Industries became what it is now, before I started my own company, we worked together. We developed the core technology together. Then why? Because when it came time to patent it, Marlowe claimed sole ownership. He had better lawyers. He had more money. He had connections I couldn't match. And when I fought him on it, he destroyed me systematically. Not because I stole from him, but because I dared to challenge him." Dominic's jaw clenched. This was a story he'd never heard before. "When my company collapsed, when the lawsuits started piling up, when the media turned me into a villain, I started getting threats. Death threats. Against me. Against your mother. Against you." James looked up, and his eyes were haunted. "Marlowe didn't make those threats directly, but his associates did. People who wanted to ensure I never spoke publicly about what had really happened." "So you faked your death," Dominic said flatly. "I made a deal." James's voice was barely audible now. "Marlowe came to me privately. He said he'd make the threat stop if I disappeared. If I left the country, changed my name, never contacted you or your mother again. He said he'd ensure you were taken care of, financially, professionally. He said he'd watch over you the way he would his own son. And you believed him? I was desperate. Your mother was having panic attacks. You were 17 and brilliant and angry, and I could see you turning into someone I didn't recognize. Someone consumed by hate." James stood, moving toward a drawer in the corner. He pulled out a folder, handed it to Dominic. "This is every bank statement, every trust fund deposit, every scholarship, every business opportunity that came your way over the past 17 years. Look at the sources. Really look." Dominic opened the folder with shaking hands. Page after page of financial documents. Anonymous donations. Trust funds established in his name. Scholarships from foundations that, upon closer inspection, were subsidiaries of Marlowe Industries. Business loans approved despite his lack of collateral. Venture capital investments in his early projects that had seemed too good to be true. Because they were. "He's been funding you," James said quietly. "All of it. Every step of your success. He promised me he'd ensure you had every opportunity one couldn't give you. And he kept that promise." Dominic felt like he was drowning. Why? Why would he do that? Because he felt guilty. Because destroying me destroyed your mother, and her death. James's voice broke. Her death was the one thing Marlowe couldn't rationalize away. She was innocent. She was kind. And when she died, something in Marlowe changed. He called me after her funeral. He said he wanted to make amends the only way he knew how, by ensuring her son succeeded. The folder slipped from Dominic's hands, pages scattering across the floor. I didn't know any of this, Dominic whispered. I thought I was self-made. I thought I built everything myself. You did build it, James said firmly. Your intelligence, your drive, your vision, those were yours. Marlowe just made sure you had the resources to use them. He opened doors. You walked through them. Dominic sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. I married his daughter. I married Elena to destroy him. I orchestrated everything. And now, he couldn't finish the sentence. Now you're in love with her, James said quietly. Dominic's head snapped up. I never said. You didn't have to. You're here instead of with her. You ran halfway across the world to confront me instead of staying to fix things with your wife. That's not the behavior of a man executing a revenge plot. That's the behavior of a man who's terrified he's become the villain in his own story. The words hit like physical blows. I don't know how to fix this, Dominic said. I don't know how to undo what I've done. She trusted me completely, and I betrayed her in the most calculated way possible. How do you come back from that? James sat beside him. For the first time in 17 years, father and son shared the same space, breathing the same air. You start by being honest, James said. Completely honest. No more games. No more manipulation. You tell her everything about me, about Marlowe, about the revenge plot, and how it fell apart. And then you let her decide. She'll leave me. Maybe. Probably. James put a hand on Dominic's shoulder. But that's her choice to make. You've taken away enough of her choices already. They sat in silence for a long moment. I'm sorry, James finally said. I'm sorry I left you. I'm sorry I let you build your life on a foundation of lies. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to stay and fight. Dominic looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw a man who had been broken by circumstances and had made the wrong choice in response. Just like Dominic had done. Just like Dominic was still doing. I spent 17 years hating you, Dominic said. Hating Marlowe. Building an empire out of rage. And now I find out that none of it was real. The hate, the revenge, the self-made success, all of it was built on misunderstandings and manipulations. Not all of it, James corrected gently. Your love for Elena is real. I can see it in the way you talk about her, even now. That's not manipulation. That's not calculation. That's the first real thing you've felt in years, and you're terrified of it. Dominic closed his eyes. What do I do? You go home, James said simply. You go home to your wife, and you tell her the truth. And then you spend the rest of your life proving that you're capable of being the man she deserves. Elena stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dominic's penthouse. Her penthouse now, technically, though it felt like a cage, and watched the city lights blur through her tears. 3 days had passed since the wedding. 3 days since her entire world had shattered. 3 days of sitting in this pristine, empty space and trying to figure out who she was now, that everything she believed about herself had turned out to be false. Her phone buzzed. Again. It had been buzzing constantly. Her father, her friends, Dominic's assistant, lawyers, reporters who had somehow gotten her number. She'd ignored all of it, except for one message. It was from someone she didn't recognize, a block number. He's in Buenos Aires. With his father. Thought you should know. Zach. It had to be. Dominic's best friend and business partner. Elena had spent the past 3 days replaying every moment of the past 6 months. Every conversation, every touch, every smile, trying to separate what was real from what was performance, trying to figure out if there had been any genuine emotion beneath the manipulation. The prenup sat on the marble kitchen counter, still unsigned by her. Her father had brought it by yesterday, told her she needed to sign it to finalize the marriage documents. But Elena hadn't been able to bring herself to do it. Because signing it would make this real. Would make this disaster permanent. Or would it? She walked to the counter, picked up the document, and read it again with clearer eyes. The clauses her father had presented as protective now looked different. They weren't designed to trap her. They were designed to trap Dominic. Every clause, every stipulation, every legal maneuver was structured to ensure that if this marriage failed, Dominic would lose everything. The merger between Hale Technologies and Marlowe Industries was contingent on the marriage lasting at least 5 years. If Elena filed for divorce before then, Dominic would have to forfeit controlling interest in his company. He'd essentially signed away his empire for the chance to destroy her father. Except her father had known, had orchestrated it, had turned Dominic's revenge plot into a trap that would either force him to remain married to Elena for 5 years or lose everything he'd built. It was brilliant, ruthless, exactly the kind of calculated manipulation her father excelled at. And Elena wanted no part of it. She picked up her phone and called the one person she'd been avoiding. "Sweetheart," Richard Marlowe's voice was smooth, pleased. "I was beginning to think you'd never call." "I need to know something," Elena said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Did you know about Dominic's plan before you agreed to the merger?" A pause. Then, "Yes." "How long?" "I've known who Dominic Hale was since he started his company 8 years ago. I've been monitoring him, guiding him, waiting for him to make his move." Elena closed her eyes. "Why?" "Because I owed his father a debt I could never repay. Because your mother would have wanted me to protect James's son. Because beneath all that rage and calculation, I saw someone who could be saved. And because," he paused, "because I wanted to see if you could save him." "That's not my job," Elena said coldly. "I'm not a rehabilitation project. I'm not a pawn in whatever complex game you and Dominic are playing." "No," her father agreed. "You're not. You're my daughter, and you're stronger than both of us combined. Which is why I'm going to tell you something I've never told you before." Elena waited. "I was the villain in James Hale's story," her father said quietly. "I destroyed him because he challenged me, and I couldn't tolerate being challenged. I took everything from him, his business, his reputation, his family. And when his wife died because of the stress I'd caused, I realized I'd become the kind of man I'd always despised. So you decided to play God with his son's life. I decided to give his son every opportunity I'd taken from his father. I decided that if Dominic wanted revenge, I'd let him have it. But I'd make sure he had to choose between revenge and love, between destruction and redemption." "You used me," Elena said, and her voice shook with anger. "You used your own daughter as bait in this sick experiment." "Yes," her father said. No apology, no excuse, just acknowledgement. "I did. And I'm not sorry. Because if Dominic had chosen revenge, if he'd gone through with destroying me without developing real feelings for you, then he would have proven he wasn't worth saving. But he didn't. He fell in love with you. He hesitated. He's in Buenos Aires right now, confronting his past instead of executing his plan. That means something." "It means he's a liar who got caught," Elena said. "It means he's human," her father corrected. "It means beneath all that calculated rage, there's someone capable of love, someone capable of change. The question is, are you willing to give him the chance?" Elena looked around the penthouse, at the art on the walls that Dominic had clearly chosen for her, pieces that reflected her taste perfectly. At the bookshelf in the corner, filled with books about art history. At the small touches throughout the space that suggested someone had been paying attention to who she was, even while lying about who he was. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know if I can forgive this. I don't know if I even want to." "That's fair," her father said. "But Elena, whatever you decide, make sure it's your choice. Not mine, not Dominic's, not what you think you should do or what society expects. Your choice." After she hung up, Elena stood in the penthouse for a long time, thinking about choices. She'd spent her whole life making choices designed to please other people. Choosing art curation because it seemed harmless. Choosing to live in Brooklyn because it was far from her father's world. Choosing to be invisible because it was safer than being seen. And then Dominic had seen her, Or at least, she thought he had. But maybe that was the thing. Maybe he had seen her, the real her, even while lying about everything else. Maybe it was possible for someone to manipulate circumstances while still experiencing genuine emotion within those circumstances. Maybe it was all more complicated than villain and victim, manipulator and manipulated. Elena pulled out her phone and texted the blocked number. Tell him to come home. Tell him we need to talk. Really talk. No more lies. The response came immediately. About damn time. Z. Dominic returned to New York 3 days later. He'd spent those days in Buenos Aires talking with his father, untangling 17 years of misunderstandings, grieving the relationship they'd lost and tentatively building something new. His father had agreed to come back to New York eventually, to face the past he'd been running from. But first, Dominic had to face his own past, his own mistakes, his own wife. He arrived at the penthouse at midnight, exhausted from travel and emotional excavation. He expected to find the space empty, expected Elena to have left, to have filed for divorce, to have moved on with her life the way she should have. Instead, he found her sitting on the couch in the dark, still wearing her wedding dress. Elena. His voice came out rough. She looked up, and he saw that she'd been crying, but her eyes were clear now, determined. Sit down, she said. We're going to have the conversation we should have had 6 months ago. The honest one. Dominic sat across from her, maintaining distance, and waited. I've spent the past 6 days reviewing everything, Elena said. Every moment we spent together, every conversation, every touch, and I've come to some conclusions. He braced himself. First, you're a liar. You manipulated me. You orchestrated our meeting and engineered our relationship for the sole purpose of destroying my father. That's not forgivable in any traditional sense. Dominic nodded. He wouldn't insult her by arguing. Second, my father is also a liar. He knew what you were doing the entire time. He set up this entire situation knowing that it would force both of us into an impossible position. So we're both pawns in his game, which makes me angry in ways I can't fully express. Elena, I'm not finished. Her voice was sharp. Third, despite all the lies and manipulation, I think there were moments when you were real with me. I think there were times when you forgot you were playing a role. I think somewhere in the middle of your revenge plot, you accidentally became the person you were pretending to be. Dominic felt something crack open in his chest. Yes. But here's the thing I need you to understand, Elena continued, and now her voice was shaking. I can't be in a relationship where I'm constantly wondering if you're being honest or if you're playing another game. I can't live in this beautiful penthouse wondering if every kind gesture is calculated. I can't build a life with someone I don't trust. I understand, Dominic said quietly. I'll have my lawyers draw up the divorce papers. You'll get everything. The prenup stipulations don't apply because I entered the marriage fraudulently. You'll be protected. I don't want a divorce. Dominic's head snapped up. Elena was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Anger and sadness and something else. Something that might have been hope. I don't want a divorce, she repeated. But I also don't want this marriage. Not the way it is now. Not built on lies and manipulation and revenge plots. Then what do you want? Elena stood up, and Dominic saw that she was shaking. I want us to start over. Completely over. I want you to move out of this penthouse for 6 months. I want us to date, actually date, like normal people do. I want you to tell me the truth about who you are, what you want, what scares you. And I want to do the same. No games. No manipulation. Just two people trying to figure out if there's anything real beneath all the lies. You're willing to try? Dominic couldn't believe what he was hearing. I'm willing to see if there's something worth trying for, Elena corrected. But Dominic, if you lied to me again, if you manipulate me again, if I ever feel like I'm a pawn in one of your games, I'm gone. Permanently. No second chances. No explanations. Just gone. I understand. Do you? Elena moved closer to him, and he could see the tears on her cheeks now. Do you understand that love isn't a weapon? That relationships aren't chess games? that you can't strategize your way into genuine human connection. I'm learning, Dominic said honestly. I've spent 17 years treating everything like a calculation, treating people like variables. I don't know how to just be with someone without strategizing, but I want to learn. I want to try. Elena reached out and took his hand. Her skin was warm, real, alive. Then prove it, she said softly. Take your suitcase and find a hotel. Text me in a week and ask me on a date. A real date. And we'll see what happens. Dominic stood, still holding her hand. What if I mess this up? You probably will, Elena said with a small, sad smile. And I'll probably mess it up too. But at least we'll be messing it up honestly. He wanted to kiss her, wanted to pull her close and promise her everything. But he knew that would be another manipulation, another way of trying to control the situation instead of surrendering to it. So instead, he squeezed her hand once, let go, and picked up his suitcase. Thank you, he said, for giving me a chance I don't deserve. Don't thank me yet, Elena said. We haven't even started the hard part. 6 months later, the coffee shop in Brooklyn was small, crowded, and absolutely perfect. Dominic sat at a corner table, nervous in a way he hadn't been nervous since he was 17 years old. He was early, 20 minutes early, because he'd been too anxious to wait at his temporary apartment. The past 6 months had been the hardest of his life. Therapy 3 times a week. Learning to identify his emotions instead of suppressing them. Learning to be vulnerable instead of strategic. Learning to exist without constantly calculating 3 moves ahead. He'd had dinner with Elena 17 times. Coffee dates, museum visits, walks through Central Park. Each time, he'd worked to be genuine, to share pieces of himself that were uncomfortable to expose. His fear of abandonment, his guilt over what he'd done, his ongoing struggle with the instinct to manipulate situations to protect himself. And Elena had shared pieces of herself too. Her anger at her father, her fear of being seen as weak, her own tendency to disappear instead of confronting problems directly. They'd fought twice, real fights about real things, about boundaries and expectations, and the difference between protecting someone and controlling them. Both times, they'd worked through it without manipulation, without strategic retreats, with only uncomfortable honesty. It was the most real thing Dominic had ever experienced, and it terrified him. The coffee shop door opened, and Elena walked in. She was wearing jeans and a cream sweater, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun, and she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Hi," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "Hi," he said back. They looked at each other across the small table, and Dominic felt the familiar flutter of nervousness mixed with something else. Something that felt like coming home. "So," Elena said, wrapping her hands around the coffee he'd already ordered for her. Vanilla latte with oat milk, the way she liked it. 6 months. The trial period is up. It is, Dominic agreed. I've been thinking about what comes next, Elena continued. She was nervous too. He could see it in the way she was fidgeting with her cup. About whether we move forward or walk away. About whether what we've built over these past 6 months is enough. And Dominic's heart was pounding. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and her expression was open, vulnerable, real. "And I think we should move forward," she said. "Not because we've solved everything, not because we're perfect, but because I think we're both trying, really trying. And that has to count for something." Dominic felt relief wash over him so intensely it was almost painful. "I've been terrified you were going to say the opposite." "I was terrified I was going to say it too," Elena admitted. "But then I realized something. You lied to me about how we met. You manipulated circumstances. You had ulterior motives. All of that is true. But over the past 6 months, you've been more honest with me than anyone in my entire life. You've shown me parts of yourself that are ugly and broken and scared. You've let me see you fail at things. You've been vulnerable in ways that clearly make you want to crawl out of your skin." She reached across the table and took his hand. "And that person, the honest, broken, trying person, that's who I'm choosing. Not the billionaire with the revenge plot. not the strategic mastermind. Just you. Dominic Hale. Flawed human being. Dominic felt tears prick his eyes and didn't bother to hide them. I love you. The real you. Not the image I constructed in my head. The actual person sitting across from me who calls me out when I'm being manipulative and forces me to be better. I love you too, Elena said, and her own eyes were wet. The real you. The one who's trying so hard to unlearn 17 years of emotional armor. The one who showed up to dinner 2 weeks ago and admitted he'd spent the entire day planning what to say before realizing that was manipulation and decided to just show up honest instead. They both laughed, and it felt like something releasing, some final piece of tension letting go. So what now? Dominic asked. Now we take it one day at a time, Elena said. We keep being honest. We keep working on ourselves. We keep choosing each other deliberately every single day. No more revenge plots? No more revenge plots, Elena confirmed. Although my father is going to be insufferably smug about this working out. He's already insufferably smug, Dominic said. I had dinner with him last week. He spent the entire time acting like he'd orchestrated our entire relationship as some kind of elaborate life lesson. Well, Elena said wryly, he kinda did. Fair point. They sat in the coffee shop for another hour, talking about ordinary things. Elena's new job at a prestigious gallery. Dominic's decision to step back from day-to-day operations at Hale Technologies to focus on philanthropy. Their plans to eventually move in together again, but this time to a space they chose together, not his penthouse of manipulation. When they finally left, Dominic walked Elena to the subway station, and at the entrance, she turned to face him. Thank you, she said softly, for doing the work, for being willing to change. Thank you for giving me the chance, Dominic replied, for seeing past what I did to who I could become. Elena stood on her toes and kissed him, soft, gentle, real. Not the calculated kiss of their first meeting. Not the desperate kiss of their wedding day. Just a kiss between two people who were choosing each other. When they pulled apart, she smiled at him. That real smile that lit her up from the inside. See you Friday, she asked. See you Friday, he confirmed. He watched her disappear down the subway stairs, and for the first time in 17 years, Dominic Hale felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Peace. The art gallery was packed. Elena stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived for the opening night of her first curated exhibition as the director of the Marlowe Hale Foundation for the Arts. The foundation had been her idea, a way to use both family fortunes for something meaningful. Dominic had agreed immediately, and even her father had contributed, though he'd insisted on adding his name to it. Some things never changed. You look nervous, a voice said beside her, and Elena turned to find Dominic holding 2 glasses of champagne. I'm terrified, she admitted. What if no one likes the pieces I chose? What if I've made a horrible mistake? Then we'll learn from it and do better next time, Dominic said, handing her a glass. But for the record, I think you've chosen brilliantly. Every piece tells a story about transformation, about breaking and rebuilding, about choosing authenticity over perfection. You would say that, Elena said, but she was smiling. You're biased. Extremely biased, Dominic agreed. Also correct. They stood together, watching people move through the gallery, studying the pieces Elena had spent months selecting. Contemporary artists exploring themes of redemption, second chances, the beauty in broken things made whole again. Your father's here, Dominic said, nodding toward the entrance. Richard Marlowe had just walked in, accompanied by a woman Elena didn't recognize. He looked older, but lighter somehow, less burdened by the weight of his own ruthlessness. And look who he brought, Elena said, surprised. Behind her father was James Hale, Dominic's father, who had returned to New York a year ago and had been slowly rebuilding his relationship with both his son and, surprisingly, with Richard Marlowe. The 2 men who had destroyed each other were now attempting something resembling friendship. It was complicated. It was messy. It was real. Ready? Dominic asked, offering her his arm. Ready, Elena confirmed. They walked through the gallery together, greeting guests, discussing the art, existing in the life they'd chosen to build together. It wasn't the fairy tale Elena had imagined on her wedding day. It was better than that. It was honest. Later that night, back in their apartment, a space they'd chosen together in a neighborhood that split the difference between his Manhattan roots and her Brooklyn soul, Elena found Dominic standing at the window, looking out at the city lights. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Just thinking about how different everything is from 2 years ago," he said. "How if you'd told me then that I'd be standing here, genuinely happy, building something real with you, I wouldn't have believed it was possible." "Do you miss it?" Elena asked. "The plotting? The scheming? The revenge?" Dominic turned to face her, and his expression was soft, open, vulnerable in the way he'd learned to be. "No," he said simply. "I don't miss being that person. I don't miss the emptiness. I don't miss waking up every day with nothing but revenge driving me forward." He cupped her face in his hands. "This is better. You are better. We are better." "We're not perfect though," Elena reminded him. "We still fight. We still mess up. I still get anxious that you're not being completely honest. And you still sometimes catch yourself trying to manage situations instead of just experiencing them." "True," Dominic agreed. "But we're honest about it. We work through it. We choose each other anyway." Elena leaned into his touch. "I'm glad I gave you a second chance." "I'm glad you're stubborn enough to believe people can change," Dominic replied. "Speaking of changes," Elena said, pulling back slightly with a mysterious smile, "I have something to tell you." Dominic's eyes widened. "Are you?" "No, not that," Elena laughed. "Not yet anyway. But I got a call today. From a publisher. They want me to write a book about the foundation, about using art as a vehicle for social change and redemption." "Elena, that's amazing." "There's a catch though," she continued. "They want me to include our story. The real story. The revenge plot, the manipulation, the second chance. All of it. They think it would provide a compelling narrative framework for talking about transformation and forgiveness." Dominic was quiet for a moment. Elena watched him process, watched him work through his instinct to control the narrative, watched him consciously choose vulnerability instead. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. "I want to write it," Elena said. "But only if you're okay with it. Only if you're willing to have our story, all of it, the good and the ugly, out there publicly." "Will it hurt you?" Dominic asked. "Having people know you were manipulated? Having people judge you for taking me back?" "Probably," Elena admitted. "But I think it might help people too. To know that relationships aren't always simple. That people can change. That you can choose to forgive without being weak." Dominic pulled her close. "Then write it. Tell our story. The whole, messy, complicated truth of it." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He kissed her forehead. "We spent too long living in lies. If our truth can help even one person, it's worth it." Elena wrapped her arms around him and held on tight, feeling grateful for this moment, this man, this life they'd built from the ashes of revenge and lies. It wasn't the story she'd imagined when she first saw Dominic across a gallery opening 2.5 years ago. It wasn't the fairy tale her younger self had dreamed of. It was better. It was real. And that made all the difference. In the end, the billionaire who'd married the heiress for revenge had discovered that the greatest treasure wasn't wealth or power or the destruction of enemies. It was the slow, painstaking work of becoming honest. It was the vulnerability required to be truly seen and loved anyway. It was the choice made every single day to be better than he was yesterday. It was redemption. It was love. It was home. I am absolutely overwhelmed by the journey we've been on together, from a marriage built on lies to one built on truth, from a man consumed by revenge to one dedicated to helping others find redemption. Redemption is always possible. It doesn't matter how far you've fallen, how many people you've hurt, how broken you've become. If you commit to the work of change, if you choose honesty over performance, if you prioritize love over revenge, redemption is possible. But here's the thing. Redemption isn't easy. It's not a dramatic moment where you wake up and everything is different. It's the daily choice to be better than you were yesterday, It's the vulnerability required to admit your mistakes. It's the humility required to accept punishment without making excuses. It's the commitment to changing, not because you want to be seen as good, but because you genuinely want to be good. Please leave a comment below and tell me, what did you think of Dominic and Elena's story? Do you believe redemption is always possible? What was your favorite moment from the entire narrative? Which character's journey resonated with you the most? Will you follow this channel for more stories like this? And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now. Thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling everything. Thank you for believing in the power of redemption and second chances. Until next time, my beautiful souls, choose love. Choose honesty. Choose redemption.